start. Let's wait for our last friends who are registering can come to the auditorium. So, good morning again. Welcome to the 5th edition of CPDP LatAm. And this year will be dedicated to the data governance, to democracy, developments, and the global majority. This first opening session will be dedicated on how to build the self-determination, the informational self-determination in the global majority. And I need to start calling our distinguished guests, my colleague Professor Nicolas Zingales, and co-creator of the organization of CPDP LatAm. A round of applause to him. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Privacy, Ana Brian, welcome, from the University of Montevideo. The Director President of the National Authority of Data Protection, Valdemar Gonçalves, welcome. Our researcher, Amrita Sengupta from India. Dr. Carolina van der Weilds, Chief of the Division of E-commerce of the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Carol. Dr. Camila Managano, DPO of iFood. Welcome, Camila, once again. Dr. Rodrigo Correia, Secretary of Integrity, Transparency, and Data Protection of the City of Rio, who is 1 minute late. And we are going to welcome him in 1 minute. Maya Julia Giorgelli, who works in the Defense of the People in Buenos Aires. And unfortunately, Catherine Bailey from MIT couldn't arrive because she had a problem in Panama. And our friend Maria Julia has the incredible role to bring us some of the new things of the autonomous city of Buenos Aires and participate in our conference. Thank you very much for your availability, Maria Julia. And last but not least, and I think Professor Ciswis Nile from the Nelson Mandela University, and he will be online. I don't know if he's already connected. He's already connected, but we cannot see him. But he's in the clouds somewhere. So he's the professor in the Nelson Mandela University, and he was one of the founders of InfoReg South Africa. That is the data governance authority in South Africa. Now let's start. I would like to start, as it happens every year, with an introduction about the topics that we chose this year. The general topic of the conference is data governance for the development and democracy in the global majority. And I want to highlight why we chose this global majority topic. This is not a term with a geopolitical connotation. However, it is a term that demands a reflection about why these different countries from Latin America, Africa, and Asia are considered a heterogeneous group of global majority. The only common characteristics of these countries are the colonial past. All of them were colonies. All of them somehow were victims of a dynamic of exploitation for centuries. And it is very important to understand the sensitivity that is in these countries for new dynamics of colonialism of data, the digital colonialism. In the global majority, people understand really well what it means, the concentration of power, the concentration of income, and how structurally this concentration leads to inequalities and discrimination. Therefore, it is essential to understand our research about AI and data that highlighted in the last years. That is the only alternative not to be digitally colonized is to be digital sovereign. And that is the capacity to understand the digital technology, knowing how to develop it and to regulate it effectively to reach autonomy and the control on the technology. And for most of you that I believe that are practitioners of data governance, the informational self-determination is a well-known concept. Everybody knows that it was created in the 80s, in 83, with the decision of census in Germany, and then many other scholars built on this concept as on a highway with the data, with the extension of people's body, data as an electronic extension of people's bodies and people's personality, and it was integrated in the Article 2 of LGPD here in Brazil. 2 years, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has created this new fundamental right for the whole continent. However, this is an individualistic decision of the informational self-determination. One point about the digital sovereignty that highlights that it is interesting to see a collective determination. If we consider the data the most valuable assets, the new oil, it is important to consider as a factor of production. And our CyberBRICS projects analyzing India and China and how these Asian countries are considering data as a production factor, as work, land, or capital for at least 1 decade or almost 2 decades. So there are a lot of things that don't need to be copied from the BRIC countries, but a lot of things needs to be studied to have different references and understand how the countries that were in the total underdevelopment and they will become global powers of technology. What is interesting here to understand is this collective view of the informational self-determination and understand that from one side it makes us understand the data as a strategic asset and an economic asset. Strategic means that it needs to be protected. And in terms of cybersecurity, of data security, in the global majority, with the exception of China, there is a lot of work to be done. In our research, we highlight the importance of the general laws of cybersecurity, agencies of cybersecurity and cybersecurity strategy. I can see Malaguchi here, that is the coordinator of the International Committee of Cybersecurity, that I am also a member. These are points that need to be adopted as early as possible. We even created proposals last year, and we are anxious for the government to adopt these measures. Besides being a strategic asset, it is also an economic asset. And I want to end my introduction with an invitation, as we did last year, that we created a position paper to debate how the regulatory frameworks and the data sovereignty in Latin America can be improved. As a proposal of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, with Professor Nicola, we created a paper about taxation of data and data equity. One point that we need to provide a debate and to receive your feedbacks and how these data can be equally taxed, or the model to extract the data. The problem is not, the idea is not that you collect data, you pay taxes. That if your business model is the extraction of data in scale and other jurisdictions, you create artificial intelligence, refining the product whose intellectual property is located in fiscal havens, and resell the refined product and the service with a small taxation. There is a failure in this system. And it is a second failure while not encouraging the laws of data security that what they provide. You should not tax only the extractivist model, but you have to encourage those who adopt those values that the general protection regulation provides. I want to welcome our friend Rodrigo Correa, secretary. He just arrived. Welcome. And I want to end my introduction sharing a gratitude to our sponsors and our institutional supporters, our partners that every year they are growing and helping us to create a conference. And I want to ask for a round of applause to all of our sponsors here. Now I'll pass the floor to my friend, Professor Nicolo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So I also would like to thank the sponsors and the community actually that makes this event possible. I want to have a few brief considerations about today's theme, that is the informative self-determination. The main objective of what I'm going to present briefly for you is to understand the importance of the transparency of this participation and the goals to get this informational self-determination an effective principle. With this, what I like to say is that this informational self-determination is not born from nowhere. It's not something spontaneous. It needs efforts and provocation. So in parallel, we have the transparency and the rights, and those needs to be used to talk about the symmetry of the information and power that it's a characteristics of this data treatment. So we have access, corrections, portability that the legislation recognizes, and the limitation of the data. And although the legislation it made it easier to exercise these rights, sometimes the people don't understand the importance of getting this active role, basically to demand that those rights to be respected in an effective way. And typically it's not compared between the companies and similar situations. What it's talking about the effectiveness of those rights. For this, I believe that the university and civil society organizations, they have an important role in helping the data holders to coordinate themselves in acting in understanding their rights. And I wanted to show an example, a study that we were able to do when we were talking about the e-commerce study. It was coordinated by me and Erika Bacconi, and it was done with students from the FGV students. And what we did was we were able to analyze the privacy policies of 100 marketplaces and e-commerce in Brazil. And we sent requests to access their data and to exclude those data. And we were able to find out some interesting things, but what I wanted to bring here as an example is that this was the first experiment that we had. After that, we had another study also done by FGV with Professor Luca Belli that applied this methodology with some corrections for the generative AI platform. And I want to invite all the community, all of you, the academy and the civil society, to start using this methodology, this database that we have to evaluate how the companies are working in their transparency and in the holders' rights. All the details are available in the website of the e-commerce And we have the QR code for those who want to enter. And I'm going to show some of those results. Oh, sorry. First, when we are talking about transparency, we have a problem that everyone that is used to with these policies, they already know that usually the text, they use ambiguous words that leave many questions about how those data are going to be treated. This is the first problem that we were able to see. The second problem, the rights of holders that needed to be mentioned according to the legislation, they need to be in the policy, but for many times they are not mentioned. And this is also reduces the understanding of the population that reads these policies to exercise those rights. But I think that the part that it got interesting in the studies was to verify how the companies didn't have clear standards try to authentify the holders. You can read here, but we don't see any holder identification before giving access to the data. So anyone can say that I want to access this person's data, and he would be able to do that. And even to exclude those data, we didn't have any type of authentication. In other cases, companies that were managing those processes through WhatsApp, that's not ideal. And many cases that would pass the legal deadline, and that's why we start being concerned with this, and we're able to identify the lesson learned with this study is that is not only having the right of holders, it's very important to have the infrastructure that is informational self-determination that needs the instructor that is going to make sure that they have this right. So this digital infrastructure, interesting in India, our colleagues, they have a book that is going to be published briefly that is going to talk about deeper on the theme, and is this data empowerment architecture that is a system to register a protocol that allows us to register the people's consent to share their data. And now why expanding this public infrastructure to have this requirement process of the holders. So to identify those holders, to answer those requests, and have this channel that is going to be consolidated only for those requests. But infrastructure itself it's not something magical. So beyond the infrastructure, we need a governance. And this is the last point that I would like to highlight. Bringing those examples from Australia, where I had the pleasure to travel at the beginning of the year, thanks to a scholarship from FAPERJ, the agency that is study agency here in Rio de Janeiro, and I studied the data governance in digital health. And they have a system that is very advanced in these ways, where they have digital and public infrastructure to register this access of the health services providers to this electronic prompt, and they have a system to represent the indigenous population to determine how those data can be reused for the secondary purposes. So how they're going to reuse those data. And it's an amazing example on paper because we have this mandatory obligation, we have this obligation, and we have a committee that is going to decide in this multi-sectorial how those data are going to be treated. But this committee, it didn't start working yet. They are not working for the last 2 years. And with this is going to connect us to a general point that is not enough to have the infrastructure and the governance if we don't have this data protection culture, when we have active people that are going to be able to have this active role in building this informational self-determination. Here in Brazil, we have, for example, this participation multi-sectorial culture. There's when we are talking about this citizen to be to inform this data, and we were determining the governance of the data, this sharing this public data between public entities. And I think that we are open when we are having this regulatory construction. It's a new step, but once again, we need to be more active when we are building our role in society as an individual or as a society itself as a whole. So I think that with this initial information, I would like to give the mic back to my colleague Luca so we can start the debate. Thank you, Nicolo. Okay, so now we are going to start debating. You gave us a lot of information so we can share, and as we are talking about, we have Anna Bryan that is working as also in the academy. We have a study last year about data transfer to understand what are the problems that make it harder to harmonize this regulation and how this is built. And if we have this informational self-determination, Anna, please, if you want to stand or if you want to stay here, it's up to you. Thank you. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be part of this opening session of our event. This year is going to be dedicated to the data governance, to the development and democracy in this global world. I thank you the opportunity to share my reflections with you in this time. In this event, we are going to work with the idea of this self-determination globally. This is not a slogan, but it's a challenge that is a deep challenge to all of us and can be qualified as a moral imperative. This informational self-determination and the ability of the individuals and the communities to decide how they are going to collect the data, how they are going to be used, and how they are being governed. And it has to do with dignity and autonomy, and it's the essence of the right to privacy in a connected world. So this right is far from being a guarantee in the whole world, especially in Latin American countries, countries from the Middle East and other places that people are being threatened. These rights are being threatened by the surveillance that are being done by these abusive platforms that are dominating and are having this relation with the data manipulation. In the global majority, many times we see the privacy being sacrificed due to this development and innovation and without the proper consent. And they are not following the transparency requests. We have to forget that privacy is not a luxury, it's a human right. It's a fundamental human right, and it's in the international treaties that are not separated from our ability to think and live in privacy. It's a precondition for this development that is going to be democratic and participative and sustainable of society.
When people do not exercise control on their personal data, when they are systematically enrolled, and when there is no way to acquire justice, there's no way to achieve equality. And this is how informational self-determination can be a central pillar of the digital governance of the global majority. And that requires that every data processed cannot be considered as a trade input. Instead, can be considered in the dimension of the person. And as such, it needs to be protected. We have to take into account that most of the technological infrastructure that the system stores in the technology in the world, the data in the world has few geographic jurisdictions. The technological companies that are most powerful are in the global north. Their terms of services and algorithms and commercial models and even the ethical frameworks are rarely planned considering the global south, and therefore millions of people from the global majority are submitted to these systems frequently without the opportunity of giving consent or opinion about it. Many data governance processes are still dominated by the perspectives of the high income countries. And these decisions have global repercussions. The voices of the indigenous peoples and the racial communities of rural communities and the youth of the global majority many times are excluded or not taken into account, even when we deal with the most vulnerable groups. The structural inequalities show an unequal access to the tools and resources necessary for the exercise of the rights to informational self determination. Many people from the global majority need access to connectivity, accessible platforms for as a consequence of the language or cultural norms. The algorithms uh, do not have ways to include the connectivities and cannot exercise their self determination. This is not about rights, it is about justice. It's not about a digital breach or in terms of access to technology, but a more profound breach that is threatened to be installed permanently if we do not fight it. The path to informational self determination of the global majority has to start with the recognition of the existing imbalances. If this is not recognized, we have the risk of fostering a dual digital order in which some can choose how to treat your data or not. The others are simply relegated. But if we think about transforming the global digital order in a system that respects the human dignity and informational self determination, we have to criticize the focus of global data based on rights and putting the human being in the center of the system. This cannot be the platform or the markets or the algorithm. It should be the human beings. The privacy and data protection and the non-discrimination are not optional. They are vital components of the digital systems. The rights should be interpreted in their context. There is no standardized model without cultural and social structures and linguistic realities that vary from region to region, and our responses should also vary accordingly. For example, the meaning of consent and the identity and the differences of perception of data are different for the indigenous community, for post-colonial periods, and multilingual communities. The informational self-determination needs to be adapted to the environment, incorporating different realities and traditions. In Ibero-American, the network is a good example. One way to support these efforts is to invest in capacities and public participation. And it is necessary to have strong data protection authorities that are independent with good resources and empowered in their role. We need to make people aware so they can know how to exercise their rights, and we need solidarity beyond the borders to resist the pressure of the massive exploitation and commercial exploitation and geopolitical coercion. We are facing a crossroads. The decisions that we'll make today will bring the future of justice, informational self-determination cannot be achieved only with rhetoricals. It requires coordinated actions, political decisions, and sustainable commitments. Firstly, we need to insist on the digital inclusion as a prerequisite for the legitimacy and effectiveness. The existence of global frameworks on artificial intelligence, data protection, and accountability platforms should reflect the voices of the necessities and the values of the global majority. And for that, it is necessary to engage governments, regulators, experts, civil society, communities all over the global south to create agendas and generate norms and create institutions. And secondly, we need to build bridges between different stakeholders as well as between people from different geographies to generate legal models and technological innovations that show that the global majority does not have a passive attitude and it is a vital architect of the digital future. And lastly, we require a prolonged investments to generate regulatory capacity to assure these authorities their independence and the empowerment to act on the public and the private sector, and also requires from the international community to prioritize privacy and data governance as a pillar of digital development and human rights. I propose to you in this conference that it is something even more than a meeting of minds. I propose that we can cross each other so the informational self-determination is not a distant aspiration and can be converted into a reality for everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for this inspirational talk. I think it is pretty much aligned with what I was saying before in the centrality of the person, but also the necessity of coordination between institutions, international institutions, and we hope this conference can be the beginning of this type of work. Now, one thing that you highlighted, that is the information of self-determination, is not about rights, but it's about justice. We have to fight for it. So your talk was really important. The context in which informational self-determination is particularly important is AI. Everybody knows. You said that the authority needs to be strong, independent, to guarantee these rights of informational self-determination, and I will put this issue to our president, Valdemar, about the ANPG and what the ANPG has been doing to make sure the informational self-determination is acquired in the context of AI. Remember that there was a subsidy for automated solutions, and we want to know the developments of that. Good morning, everyone. Initially, I would like to greet everyone who is watching us in person or remotely. I want to greet this brilliant opening table with many different opinions, each one of them defending in their own area. And I want to congratulate the organization of the event. I think it is a very good topic that we have to discuss. Since the beginning of ANPG, we say that the biggest challenge is the data protection culture. And every brick that we put on top while discussing this topic, and it is contributing for the data protection system. Artificial intelligence. Every new technology that emerges, we have a challenge that is to assimilate this technology and establish norms, and in these norms we have to talk to everyone, and it is always an impact. We had here 3G, 4G, 5G, blockchain, and what I consider a wave of technology that comes to our society, but I have no doubt that our artificial intelligence is not a wave, it's a tsunami. Until nowadays, we are being surprised with the possibilities for good or for bad, and the risk of discrimination and ethics and self risk that is imposed. And it is something that is there. We have been working a lot, and we see that artificial intelligence exceeds the data protection, it's much more than that. And the signal that we are seeing from the government and the executive branch and the government through a bill of law that was already in the Senate and now it is in the House of Representatives is that artificial intelligence will have its regulation here in Brazil. And the central institution will be the ANPD, the National Agency of Data Protection. So protecting we are preparing ourselves for this risk to discrimination and ethics. And the way that we make sure the information of self-determination is the first pillar is transparency, the control of the holders, and, regulation and enforcement. And for that, we did with this objective our subsidy grant. We had 123 contributions that are being processed in the general coordination. The automated decision worries us. We say that we are regulating these rights of the holders of explainability. It's not only about it's not only enough that response. So you're denied a response, but you have to know why. The person has the right to be explained. Identification of practices and risks associated to this automated decision. And with that, we want to strengthen the rights of the holders. And we have a regulatory agenda that provides topics as artificial intelligence, personal data treatments and high risk, good governance practices, and the rights of holders. So we are discussing that ANPD since the beginning of its process cherishes this transparency, and we do that as a routine. The public consultations and public hearing, where we try to find the ideas of every sector, of every company, and every holder, even the citizens that are helping us. We want to hear and then process our norms. It will take more time, but the result will be better. Until now, we didn't have the necessity to correct any rule edited by ANPD. Artificial intelligence poses a big risk. Our main advances is that since the beginning of our process, we created a sandbox. The challenge is to say everything that I want in this time, but the regulatory sandbox of artificial intelligence started at ANPD and has put ANPD in a level of international highlight. We don't have the expertise to make the sandbox, and especially about AI. So internationally, we tried to find a lot of ideas and knowledge. We made a document looking for partnerships, and the University of São Paulo is our partner in this. And until November, we are opening for the participation of public and private institutions. And yesterday we had a webinar that was talking about this. It was an audience that surprised us, and everyone is understanding that this sandbox, where I have a controlled environment and a learning from different parts of what a sandbox is and what risk I need to consider and what I need to test and everything that NPG is acting very quickly. And I believe that everyone understood. And then we tried to find a standardization based on evidence.
Another pillar that we have is how we are going to fiscalize this, and we want to make this fiscalization stronger. We want to increase its capacity to fiscalize. I can say that INPD it's the biggest authority in Latin America. It was we in Mexico we are ahead of this, and we are going to double the number of people that are working, and we are going to um, we have 200 officers today, and we're going to receive 213 in a way that it wouldn't be a cost 213 new officers, but we believe that this is a part of our strength. And besides hiring third parties, this was a great gain that we are already on this process. In this self-determination, in when we are talking about transparency, we can see that in the companies and organizations we have an element that it's our data worker, and we are doing the second encounter of people that work with data. Last year we didn't know. In 1 hour and a half, we have uh, more than two times the possibility of the audience that we were expecting. And this year we are going to do in a bigger place. And in the first hour, we enrolled the 400 spots that we made it available. So it's the answer that the audience understand the importance of the data protection. So it's the data controller encounter. So the NPDs wants to guarantee this protection, this data protection, and we have this understanding, and we are only passing the data, and when something happened they would ask for help, and today we see that this reality is changing. This is what I had to say. Thank you. Thank you, President Valdemar, and also to explain to us the challenges of building this supervision, and how we are going to do this in the data protection. And we are going to call our Cisnes Nai, our dear friend, professor from Nelson Mandela University. It's a partner for many years, and he created the authority of the data protection in South Africa. It took him 8 years to be an authority that was able to work with this, and he started studying the experiences from the other countries, the developing countries, if this is the right term, but it's very important for a global South country to understand this. And we are not supposed to follow United States because we don't have the same structure. So it's important to know the experiences of the countries that tried being successful or not. They try to build the institutions that are essential. So I'm going to pass the words to Cisnes Nail, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is afternoon in South Africa. I know it is the morning. It's a pity I can't be with you in Botafogo this time. Circumstances beyond my control have made me not to be able to be there with you. I first want to start by thanking the conference organizers, as well as all the guests, as well as and the special rapporteur for privacy, as well as the rector of FGV and the dean of the faculty of law, and my colleagues at the CyberBRICS Center for being here today. This event is a very, very important event. Not only is it an event that talks about data protection and related matters in the Latin Americas, but it has become an event that is now spoken about matters in BRICS Plus, as we call it now, and as Prof. Bailey has coined it, matters of data protection as well as AI in the global majority. I don't want to bore you with too much about South Africa and the developments that we've had here in terms of data protection. But with that having been said, data protection has always been a very important aspect in South Africa. Not only do we have a constitutional entrenchment of data protection in the right of privacy in the Constitution, as well as the right to access to information. South Africa, in the global South and in Africa as a whole, was one of the first countries to come up with a data protection law or a personal information law called POPIA. This particular piece of legislation was modeled around international best practice, be it the 95 data protection regulations or also the GDPR. We are very much aware of the Brussels effect and how the Brussels effect has had an effect on the development of data protections all over the world, and not just in the Africas, but also in the Latin American countries. I am happy to say to you that I was one of the first data protection commissioners in South Africa as early as 2016, and we managed, after a period of 4 to 5 years, to start having the data protection laws to be enforceable. This is a big step. Other countries have taken 5 to 10 years after the enactment of their laws to even come up with competent data protection authorities. I'm here and I'm speaking with confidence to say that not only has the South African Data Protection Authority stood fast on its independence and also taken on its own government, but I'm very, very proud to say that even the Brazilian data protection authorities, being also the cybersecurity authorities, have been steadfast at making sure that Brazil is a leader in the Latin American countries. Coming back to South Africa, we've had our first enforcement decisions in 2022, and these were followed by the first fines in 2023 and 2024. A lot of them related to data breaches, a lot of them related to unlawful processing of personal information. The major issues that have come out of data protection in South Africa are the issues of data protection and how it relates to AI, being the processing of data in the judiciary, be it the law and policy matters, and also data protection as a whole. In other words, the competence and the legitimacy of data protection authorities has also come up on the spotlight. South African Data Protection Authority, the information regulator, has been very, very, should I say, consistent in applying the law with no fear and favor, and as a result has suffered the backlash of litigation with the Department of Justice as well as the Department of Education. There are also other aspects that the South African Data Protection Authority has also made sure that it investigates sufficient time to keep up with what is happening in the global trends. Data protection, as I said, and AI data protection and cyber criminality, data protection and cybersecurity, and last but not least, also data protection and how it relates to the Internet of Things. I've already mentioned to you how the Data Protection Authority in South Africa has applied the law without fear or favor, resulting in a backlash and a non-completed litigation between the regulator and various government stakeholders or state departments. I must say, as much as the South African authorities have been also very consistent in applying the law with the private sector, I must say that there have been interesting decisions with regards to social media companies. I shall not mention them by name. And also, there has also been the development of the Department of Communications insisting on data sovereignty and also developing what they call a cloud computer policy. I don't wish to be long, as there are a lot of things that need to be said in this gracious occasion. But I do want to point out the following issues that are global issues, not just in South Africa, not just in the Latin Americas, and not just in the global majority, as Prof. Belly has coined it. Matters relating to direct marketing, matters relating to data sovereignty, the legitimacy of and the independence of our data protection authorities and cybersecurity authorities, aspects relating to cross-border sharing of data, enforcement of particular decisions by the regulators, and last but not least, emerging issues in the global majority affecting data protection. I've mentioned them before, aspects relating to AI, IoTs, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and the most. I am proud to be associated with FGV and also happy to say that Brazil and South Africa have positioned themselves in the global majority to be leaders in data protection. As usual, Prof. Belly and Prof. Zingalis and my colleagues that side have put together a world-class and a comprehensive program which will not only discuss matters in the Latin American region, but in the global aspects, and will also publish important academic papers that will shape policy as well as the understanding on data protection. With that having been said, I wish to thank the organizers once again for allowing us as a whole to be here to share knowledge and to develop this discipline of data protection. I thank you.
Sizwe, and congratulations for all the work you have done throughout these years. It's impressive to see where the Data Protection Authority has arrived. And as you recognize, this is something that also was mentioned earlier, we need to fight for it, you know, and the authority has been active also on that front. So there is also a need for some special section of the authority that deals with the litigation aspect, which is something important when it comes to big, powerful companies that have armies of lawyers, you know, trying to contest every single detail. So another point that you highlighted is this one of data sovereignty and the alignment of South Africa with Brazil that comes from the BRICS discussions that have been taking place, now BRICS Plus. And this is a perfect segue for our next speaker, Amrita Sengupta from India. She now is a Cyber BRICS Fellow also at FGV. And she can tell us a little bit about the data empowerment architecture that has been developed in India, and I think this is a good example of what was being discussed here, because it gives some data sovereignty, and at the same time, this is being exported as a model to other jurisdictions. Some countries in Latin America are adopting digital public infrastructures developed in India or with the Indian blueprint, and I think you have some forthcoming work in relation to the intersection between DPI, digital public infrastructure, and artificial intelligence. So we will be very eager to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much, Nicolo, and thank you for having me here. So maybe I'll sort of start with a little bit of context of India's digital public infrastructure. Primarily, many of us may have heard of it as the India Stack, which has essentially 3 components, which is ID, which is the Aadhaar that some of us may have heard of, which came to be in 2009, followed by payments, which is the UPI platform, again, came to be in 2016, and the subject of conversation today, which is the data empowerment and protection architecture, which is essentially a data exchange platform. So just to talk a little bit about DEPA, then it is like the other DPIs in India, based on this sort of public-private effort, where it is coordinated between public entities and private bodies, often with voluntary organizations, to create an exchange architecture where users can voluntarily share data with consent on these platforms, which can then be shared with other organizations and institutions. This was initially started off as, of course, an innovative idea, and then it was brought to actualization by the Reserve Bank of India through the account aggregator framework. The account aggregator framework essentially acts as a consent manager. What it does is that it creates an intermediary platform where a lot of the users who may have their financial data situated in different places, like I have a fixed deposit sitting in one bank, I have mutual funds in another bank. What this architecture allows you to do is to have all of this financial information in one place, and to have that access in one place for you to then determine what financial decisions you can make. And the other thing that it does is that this consent management framework, the account aggregator framework, then allows you to, as a user, to share this information with other financial institutions. The outcomes that are expected from this exchange is that, one, for the user is to have full consent and sort of autonomy over how this data is shared, and the other is for this data then to be used to make decisions. For example, if the user has access to more information on different financial institutions, maybe they can have improved loan outcomes where somebody is able to get better interest rates. So this is kind of the sort of the idea behind creating this architecture. And of course, it's built on certain fairly interesting and innovative principles. Now, the complication begins with the fact that, one, that there is the DEPA, which is being, to some extent, being actualized by the account aggregator framework, which at this point is being regulated by the Reserve Bank of India, because it is mostly for financial entities. But there is also the Data Protection Act in India, which came to be in 2023. The rules are still being operationalized, so the Data Protection Act is not, it's yet to be operationalized in some ways, but that also talks about consent managers. So the legal liabilities of where some of this overlaps will be is something to be seen. The other part that, of course, that I want to talk about is this over-reliance on consent, and tying back to the point on informational self-determination. The epistemology of informational self-determination, I understand, is in German jurisprudence, which talks about sort of this moral autonomy and agency of humans. But I think Luca had asked us to be provocative, so I'm going to say that informed consent actually doesn't exist. Informed consent at best is partial, and in most instances is notional, which is that we believe or we have a perception that we are taking informed decisions about how our data is being used, but most often, and especially so in the global majority context in which we are talking about a lot of this data collection and data protection, it is not in most instances informed. I like to make this analogy that just as perfect competition exists in the theories of neoclassical economics, informed consent exists in data protection laws, but doesn't actually exist in reality. So what does that essentially do in terms of the architecture and how it is being operationalized and some of the challenges that we see? Now, within the account aggregator framework, what we've seen is definitely that it's a good model in the way that it's had about 4 or 5 years. It's still quite early to determine successes or failures of the architecture. What we know from December 2024 is that there's 7 to 8% of Indian population that is already on these platforms sharing data. And of course, there are a lot of the financial entities that have also now been a part of this account aggregator platforms. The data exchange, while is claimed to be secure, in the absence of the data protection law, there are a lot of sort of gray areas in how that data is being managed, how that data is being stored, whether or not there are data breaches that are happening. There are, given the increase in touch points, digital touch points of this financial information that is being collected, we have seen in our work in India that there has been an increase in financial frauds as well, that people have a lot more experiencing a lot more scams and frauds. And the other problem of the creation of this idea of consent is also that there are a lot of power imbalances that exist between the entities that are exchanging the data. As a user, when I'm consenting for the data to be shared with financial institutions, we actually don't know how that data is being used. If we sign up to say that this is going to have purpose limitations, often the consent document will say the purpose limitation is to share it with third parties, but not actually elaborating how those third parties are going to use that information. And so therefore, again, pointing to this idea of some of these consent questions may not work, and therefore to have stronger burden of responsibility on data fiduciaries, which is what I think some of your work talked about around taxation and things like that, to really think about how do we move from this primary consent model to other models which put a lot of the burden on different players who have more entrenched power within the system. And the other thing that we're also seeing is that in India, especially with the growth of fintech, there are a lot of new digital lending platforms that are also on the DAPA framework or the account aggregator platforms. And sometimes, they have extractive lending, loan collection practices, et cetera. And given that the financial system, the financial economy is reliant on accessing loans, so a small ticket loan person who's accessing loan may have to rely on this platform to get the loan, but may not be able to actually repay in the same terms or the interests that are being asked for. So again, it creates certain kinds of imbalances which need to be checked for as we develop some of these systems, and also sort of think about how these systems are going to be used in other jurisdictions or in other contexts. Now, within the financial inclusion, of course, the other model, the UPI, has seen early successes. So it is not to say that, it's all gloom and doom, but it is to say that how can we use our learnings from UPI, our learnings on what have been the sort of challenges with ID systems in the last 20 years to actually build better architectures that, again, point to the point that Anna was making, that center human beings at the sort of conversation around data protection, center justice. And with that, I think I will end my introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Amrita. It is very interesting to see these experiences, to understand how the countries of the global majority, in a way that they are being transformed into the leadership in the regulation. And I believe that the experience of the digital public infrastructures in India, and nowadays it is being studied by many countries to understand how they can be replicated, their successes, but also how can they avoid the failures. And this is our task as academic and scholars, to analyze objectively the ingredients of the success and the failures of the public policies and the regulation, and the ways that the policies are made. What we include in our research is that the digital public infrastructures are a regulation tool. It is a regulation through the digital public infrastructure. It's another way of regulating, as Lawrence Lasses said 25 years ago. It's another vector of regulation. And this is a good continuation from a big system as the Indian systems to a big systems built by iFood. And we have the pleasure to bring here for the first time Camila Nagano, DPO of iFood. I'm sorry, Camila. I forgot. It's actually Carolina now. Carolina from. And this connection between the international system to the system of services and international trade in the international cooperation. Carolina van der Velde is leading an excellent work about data governance in the digital economy with a huge success this year. For the first time, BRICS has adopted a declaration on data governance in the digital economy, and it was a big success due to the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we have a bias in here and many different conversations to share the research that we are doing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that are really careful. And I always highlight that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the part of Brazil that needs to be recognized, because it is excellent to see the work that you are doing in the backstage. And this is an opportunity for the Brazilian Foreign Affairs has the opportunity to shine now. The floor is yours. Thank you, Luca. Thank you, FGV, for the invitation. It is a huge pleasure to be here, not only to be a member of this panel, but to have the opportunity to follow during these 2 days rich debates that certainly will have an important role in our daily exercise to try to understand our international challenges and position Brazil the best way possible, always with the civil society and other government bodies. I think it was really interesting, the talk of the professor of the Nelson Mandela University and also our Indian colleague who is here, because it makes this perfect bridge for what we tried to do in the Brazilian presidency of BRICS. I think that there was a consensus. BRICS has many track negotiators since the area of health, human rights, and cybersecurity, and etc. And it is really a universe in itself. And there was a certain demand from the Brazilian presidency for us to make an adjourning of the negotiating agenda, and we saw that reflected in the digital agenda and many understandings and documents and declarations that were given by the Brazilian presidency. And it's important to make this contextualization for us to understand what the Brazilian presidency delivered this year. And until the end of the year, it's going to continue delivering. The understanding about the data economy, that is the document that I'm going to detail, that it has to do with our point. It's one of the documents that is in a group of documents agreed upon. And beyond the documents that we give in the end, the most important and interesting of this exercise is this exchange of information and perspectives, because you end up mapping many problems that are not so evident in your context, but will become evident in the future, in 1 year or in 1 decade. So this is the most interesting exercise that we take from this presidency. The Brazilian presidency has delivered these understanding documents, but also a declaration of leaders in the highest level on governance of artificial intelligence. It is a document that is horizontal, as we call it, because it gets 2 classic pillars when you talk about artificial intelligence in international debate. that is cybersecurity or security in general, and the privacy and data protection and human rights. What the presidency has added to this debate is the dimension of economic development, meaning that you cannot have international understanding on governance of AI or digital economy and data governance if we do not adopt a perspective of economic development. And this was the third pillar that we tried to balance this international discussion. That was an attempt to shed light on these challenges. In the Declaration of Leaders on the Governance of AI, the second session is about regulation of markets. So when we discuss data sovereignty, we are discussing data sovereignty, we are talking about regulation.
It can be more strict or less strict, but we need some type of regulation so we can have space for public policy development. And this was the contribution that the Brazilian presidency brought to BRICS, and BRICS is showing to the international arena. It's a number of international initiatives in the data governance and also with artificial intelligence, different forums. Last year, we have the Global Distant Company delivering the first consensus about different aspects of digital economy and digital transformation. You have a work group about the data governance for ECOSOC, and the idea is that BRICS is able to address this public policy spaces to have this economical development. So what is the understanding, the BRICS understanding about this data economy governance? So the first experience that I like to share with you is especially the experience of you getting a different point in this negotiation. So the negotiation calendar of BRICS, at least last year, it was working with digital economy from a perspective of talking about the infrastructure connectivity that is important. It was working with this debate about electronic commerce that are important, but we wanted to get this difference, how we are going to transform this for a broader agenda that it's the data economy agenda. And our first challenge was knowing what would be the reaction of the partners when you propose an agenda item and a delivery. And for us, it was not clear if we're going to have this availability to have this debate, or if we are going to, people are going to contest, and what's going to happen. So it's a normal situation when you are negotiating internationally. And to our surprise, it's a happy surprise that we have the support by the Brazilian governance to have a document that BRICS start debating about data economy in a more structured way. The understanding of the data economy and governance comes from four sources, especially the framework of data policy from the African Union. That's one of the main documents that inspired the understanding of BRICS, the initiatives of cross-border data flow, and of course, when we have this economical pillar, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, and also the high-level principles for development, and that it's agreed in the Indian presidency of G20. This understanding is going to have three areas. We have 10 objectives, 6 principles, and what is interesting that to conclude to end up my speech and talking about the future, for me it's interesting the areas that the main goal was to establish a type of roadmap for the future BRICS conversations when we are talking about the data economy. So it's around 8 developing points for the futures, and of course inside the BRICS logic, each presidency is going to prioritize what they understand is relevant for its context, but we have this roadmap. So we have a recognition effort with multiple policies with different data, different countries searching to have this operability between them, and the recognition of the importance of this data allocation as a public policy too. And the importance of portability and data, that is another important point, and a point that needs to be debated more due to its function inside the international regulations of data governance, the protection of the consumers and competitors. There are two important aspects in this BRICS will to gather economical importance in this digital transformation debate. The digital public infrastructure as the main, we might say, the main bias to establish the conditions to be part of this digital economy in a broader digital economy, the conditions that we used. And of course, a study area that it's the data, the safety, the safe data transference, and private protection, private data protection. And when we are talking about data economy development, when we are talking about commerce, always focusing this open source and other aspects that are related to the public policies and the data economy. Those are the main points of my understanding. I think that the BRICS agenda is here for us to update. And always thank you all the work that is done in the CIDR BRICS, especially the ones that makes us be part of these differences. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carolina. It's important that you talked about the idea of data economy, that it's being more and more in the governance agendas. We try to get an item in this agenda with a paper, this working paper that was mentioned at the beginning when we are talking about the data taxation and the understanding that it has a great value in this asset. And we need to take into account when we are talking about transferring those values from one country to the other. So it has to do with this agenda, and I think it's very important. Tomorrow we are going to have an area dedicated to the value of the data and how we understand those values. And you plant a seed so we can start talking about this. And it's important to highlight something you talked about, the data protection with other areas as the consumers' rights and the competitors. And this gives me a chance to talk that in the Cyber BRICS we also organized a meeting of competitors authorities we called the BRICS Plus Digital Competition Forum, where we promoted a debate about digital ecosystems. And especially here we have the best event in Brazil, the best example in Brazil, that is iFood. That is a company that created a network of commercial partners and consumers and knows how to use those data to guide the personalized offers, and at the same time make sure this informational self-determinations for the policies and tools. So Dr. Camila, I would like to hear from you a little bit about this theme. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you, Professors Nicolo and Luca, for organizing this event. I also like to talk to my friends and colleagues here. It's a pleasure to be here this year as a sponsor in a different location, in a different place, and this dialogue is very important. So my role here today is not only representing the technology companies that are inserted in this privacy and data protection, but Brazilian companies that are inserted in this digital ecosystem, and they are searching to bring this protection, data protections from Brazilians to Brazilians in surrounded by this authenticity. And first of all, we need to articulate this. When we're talking about the question, you just say we need to get this understand the common interest between restaurants and consumers. It's a challenge but I want to add the public interest. So it's a big challenge for the companies, for iFood especially, how we are going to balance all those interests, how we have the data protection on top of this, and the lesson learned that I wanted to bring, that it's possible. It's possible with creativity, with innovation, transparency. I know my colleagues here that work in companies and work with technological companies, they know and understand this challenge, and they are searching this every day. But when I'm part of events like this, especially with these amazing speakers, I think that my main contribution with examples, and I'm going to bring true examples of projects, iFood projects, and I'm trying to illustrate for our colleagues here, the regulators, the researchers, to try to illustrate those challenges and how we get this balance, and how you can help us to deal with those scenarios. The first example, and I'm going to contextualize for those who are not Brazilians, it's about the public safety. It's a partnership between the government of Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. And a few years ago here in Brazil, we went through a situation that people that were pretended to be delivered guys, and they would buy fake bags, and they used this condition, this trust between the delivery man and the consumers, and they were robbing people at the streets. So they used the clothes and the fake bag, a fake iFood bag, and they would rob people at the streets. And we have the challenge how we work with the government to guarantee to know who are those people that are fake, and who are the delivery men that are working for us. And one of the things that we did with this API, and I was questioning one of the events, it was especially based on the data that the government, the authorities have from those people. We would just send back the data if they are registered in the app, and if he's going to the delivery point. So the data of the delivery man, and on the other hand, this safety, that would be a public interest, and we said that it was the main concern at the time. And the second example that I want to bring here for you today, and actually this example is a spoiler of what we are going to present and the AI workshop on Friday. It's a case that I showed last year. People like this event, but it's how we balance this interest of the company in using artificial intelligence and to innovate and improve our AI models, at the same time protecting the data of those clients and delivered that has those data treated. And we implemented this tool that it's able to identify this personal data, and it's going to use the ones that are going to be used for this training models. We are going to talk about this on Friday. Please don't miss the workshop, the technical workshop, and explaining how this was implemented. But those are two examples that illustrate well. It's not we only look at this right, but we have many other rights and interests, and our role is to balance this every day and to bring the positive result for society. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Now, following the order, now let's pass the floor to Maria Julia. And the last two examples that we are bringing here are two examples that at the same time are micro and macro, because we are going to talk about the city of Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro. There are two big cities per micro ecosystems, micro and macro at the same time. Now I want to pass the floor to Maria Julia, because the city of Buenos Aires needed to deal with a reality that is really peculiar in the implementation of AI for facial recognition, that everyone is getting used to it, but maybe we shouldn't. And they regulated very incisively this reality that was imposed. And it's really interesting to see the experience of the city of Buenos Aires, especially the defense of people represented here by Maria Julia. Please. Well, good morning, everyone. As Lucas had said, in 2019 in Buenos Aires, the facial recognition system was established, and this system was leveraged by the Secretary of the Law Enforcement Security with the idea to capture runaways, and the experience was not very good. Today, the facial recognition system is suspended by a provisional measure since 2019 until now. And we can say that a lot of water went under the bridge, as we say in Spanish, and many things have happened. And we are working with the Public Defender's Office in the city of Buenos Aires in the civil society. And finally, we judicialized this case and we intervened in these regards. But the facial recognition system brought arbitrary arrests in some cases. In other cases are more complicated situations because there was a problem. There was a person that spent 6 days in prison, even though this person was expressing that I'm not this person that the system recognized. It was also detected with consultations from the security system 7 million biometric data for no apparent reason, and there were also failures about cybersecurity. Besides that, these improper consultations and recklessness about logins. All of these ideas that I'm bringing this morning shows us some lessons. I really liked the idea that Nicolo brought, that in order to be valid, the informational self-determination, we need to work actively and to cause that, because the feeling that we have is that the technologies are being boosted by an idea of technological solutionism, as it was said many years ago. This idea that there is always innovation moving forward, and we believe that with innovation we are going to solve problems that are different, like economic and social, and issues related to violence, for example. And sometimes we resort to technology without necessarily testing these tools. And in the case of City of Buenos Aires, this is what happens. The facial recognition system from 2019 didn't have any legal grounds. It didn't have any provisions regarding artificial intelligence use. Our data protection needs to be updated, but there was no regulation about security. That at the moments that legislation had, and then there was a law that was enacted and clearly impacted the rights of people. Because it was not complied with the regulation. It had this algorithm opacity that was mentioned here. And in our case specifically, the laws didn't provide. There was no impact assessment to the privacy. That is a study that is being made right now because of this judicial decision that I mentioned. To conclude, I think that we need to be aware that the technology has a determined purpose. They are not neutral, and it's important to look at them critically in order for us to balance the objectives and the purpose that is being pursued or that is being tried to achieve, because they are considered as true, And we believe the technologies, and it's really difficult to deconstruct what technology indicates us. Beyond the human supervision with the guarantees of transparency and etc. This previous analysis is critical for us to assure the rights of the citizens. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Julia. I will not continue in Spanish here because my Spanish is a little bit rusty. But it's important to see this example of the city of Buenos Aires ahead of other countries and institutions understanding the problems of the facial recognition system in 2019, and also in this culture of analyzing the impact of data protection in the actions made by the municipality. Now, going to the last speaker that represents the city of Rio de Janeiro. I know that here you guys created a council of data protection in the city, and you made some measures to foster the culture of data protection. And these initiatives are being praised in many different events about what you have or what you guys have done. And I would like to hear from you, Dr. Rodrigo. What was these initiatives and the actions that you identified to foster the informational self-determination? And please, you have the floor. Good morning, everyone. I will take this first question, the opportunity of this first question, to congratulate Luca for one more CPDP LatAm. This is a national reference event in terms of data protection, and why not in the global majority? And I'm really happy to be in such a qualified panel, and mostly with women, and which is really interesting. And I don't have a lot to contribute because the debates were very qualified and substantial. But what I want to bring to this talk is to the local level. The city of Rio, as well as the city of Buenos Aires, has this global aspect of different events, and we have to be worried with the experience, the user experience of the Rio citizen. And I make a link here with the excellent talk of Maria Julia that no one today is going to oppose to the installation of cameras in the cities, whereas many of the big centers have the challenge of public security. That's not the point. The point is, what is the governance and how this data is being treated ethically and with security, that despite meeting the demands of public security, we have their personal data properly shared and stored according to the current legislation. The construction of a data protection culture is a municipal challenge and in all of the public administrations. And I say that because the first thing that when we bring to the civil servants and the municipality of Rio, we are talking about a city with more than 6 million inhabitants, 200,000 civil servants. When we bring the obligations of data protections to be complied with, the first predictable result is the resistance. It's one more obligation to comply with. I have to service the national authority, the public prosecutor's office, and now the data protection authorities. The challenge is to create a culture in which I can bring the engagement of this employee, and the employees can be part of this process, so they can understand that data protection is beyond limiting information. It's more than that. It's to guarantee the security of this flow of information. The personal data protection is to facilitate and give this employee the necessary security while treating this data. Of course, that the public administration needs personal data to build public policies. Efficient public policies are built with data, and we need this partnership of the employees in this group of 200,000 civil servants so they can be part of this process and be engaged. And we edited in the beginning of the administration a national program of personal data protection based in 5 pillars: the comprehension of the problem, the diagnostics of all the secretariats, how the adequacy to the data protection regulation in each area of the city. After we understood the problem, we mapped the risks and we studied how these risks could be mitigated and reduced. And later, we formulated, along with the other bodies, their governance documents and their data privacy statements. And lastly, the last phase is the mobilization and the awareness of these municipal civil servants. The question about the data protection cultures presents some results. In 2024, in a program that we started in 2021, although the LGPD is 2018, we have 190 people in charge of the data protection. In the city, every secretary and every entity is considered a controller in the design that we made. So we had 190 people in charge of storing the data. So the secretary has access to the data controller. We formulated 170 privacy notices, and more than 1,600 people were trained with the perspective of data protection. These agents do not have specific backgrounds on data protection. These agents will act voluntarily. Unlike a private company where the employees is paid by that, this civil servant is in charge of that without any extra payments. They do that voluntarily. So bringing them to the engagement to be part of this process is critical in this challenge to build a new culture. And the culture is only built when people understand that this subject is important, that this is relevant for the municipal administration routine. And it's not only the data protection that is going to make the public policy more difficult. The data privacy will facilitate and allow a better formulation of public policies with ethics, security, and transparency. These data responsible people can be working in the websites, and you have their contact information. If the data holder does not know which secretariat his demands will be referring to, you can access the portal or you can call 1746, and a person, a person that is in charge of this data will handle all this communication with our National Authority of Data Protection. And the City of Rio will follow this challenge to build a data protection culture, and this is permanent, it is cyclical, and it's really good to hear discussions about the global south of the global majority, but also it is important to put the local perspective. The citizen needs to understand that their data is being well treated. The most vulnerable citizen, and this initiative of BRICS is essential. When you bring the representative of the cyber BRICS here, is that since the organisms, the multilateral organizations, until the end, until the local experience. So in fact, we have all the doors protected so the Carioca citizen can be protected. Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. After these talks, these intriguing talks from the micro to macro, they explained to us eloquently the opportunities, but also the challenges of the informational self-determination. I would like to open for questions and comments in the room. I'm sure that you have a lot of questions, but I will ask you not to be long in your comments or questions, because I know that in some opportunities some people take the opportunity to speak for 10 minutes, so I kindly ask you to be brief in the maximum of 30 seconds or 1 minute, and to be directed to one of the speakers. You can raise your hand in case you have questions or comments, and then in 15 minutes we are going to wrap up this plenary session with Danilo Donedo's awards that you all know. That is the award for the best papers in our call for papers in the previous years. But before, I can see some hands raised here. There's one here and one in the back. Let's get 2 or 3. Okay, good morning everyone.
I want to congratulate for the event organization. A question for Itamaraty. It's interesting what you are talking about, how was the process to get this declaration of BRICS, and how do you think this BRICS declaration can influence and other processes that are still being developed in the South global and the global and in the region. Thank you all of you for your comments and the information. Thank you. Thank you for your question. I'm going to answer what I expect to be done, not necessarily. It's a number of international processes, and we expect them to happen in the regional environment in Mercosur and LatAm that are related to the digital economy in a general way, but we have a specific debate about data economy and about data governance. So, of course, that we talk about artificial intelligence, that it's connected, but it's not the same thing. But when we talk about Global Digital Compass last year, we have the GT of Global Governance at the ECOSOC and Science and Technology through this the development and United Nations. It's an initiative that it's being in the first stages. I think that we have 2 meetings up to now, and the expectation is that BRICS is able to get to this negotiation with the minimal consensus that for other companies we have some consensus, and the OECD that is going to influence. But I think that what we have as a goal is to have this minimum consensus, or at least to guide where in this perspective of the BRICS countries this debate should how they should do, and the points that I think that one of the points that are in the BRICS, they can be expanded for the Mercosur and other areas with these adjustments that each of them requires. But I think that the idea was to start a launch of this negotiation so they can give us positive results later. I noticed that we have 4 questions, and then we're gonna end up with, because I know everyone has questions, but we have one here, Laguste, Cecilia, Sara, and here, you can start. Good morning, everyone. Adriana Aquino from the state of Recife. I want to congratulate the event, the organizations, and the level of the speakers. And I have a question to my specific area and also to Valdemar. President Valdemar. All of you talked about the need of changing this culture and us understanding the importance of the personal data. What INPD would it's doing concern to this population, because other ones as the consumers' right we understand, because this was done and it was debated over and over throughout the decades about data protection and the ownership of this data, that it's what's being done in the area. What you're doing in this area. maybe we can have the 4 questions and then the panelists can answer 4 of them together. Otherwise, we are going to pass the time. So we have one with Malaguchi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your presentations. My name is Marcelo Malaguchi. I work with the safety institution and I work with cybersecurity. And it's an area that is connected with the data protection and privacy. Usually we simplify this model saying that the cybersecurity it's important and the data leak is exposed. So basically, I want you to explain in your knowledge limitation about your perspective that each one of the institutions is working when we are talking about prevention versus reaction. So when we are dealing with this and when we are stopping this leak. Thank you. Cecilia. And then the last one, it's on the other side. Maybe with 2 microphones would be more efficient. Good morning. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is for the iFood colleague. I want to know if you can tell us a little bit more the total volume of data that iFood has currently with all the transactions, all the operations, and if you have this data in WUS, and if you can tell us a little bit about the use of artificial intelligence that shows iFood as a successful case and using this artificial intelligence, the generative artificial intelligence. And I know that we are talking specifically about data, but we cannot talk about the data governance without thinking about technology and how we are using this data, where this technology is coming from, and the real use and where they are being stored, the data that are compiled. Thank you. We have another one here.
Integrity, where when models are being trained in the global north, specifically AI models, and they come to the global south, we're aiming to test the models for local context. My question here is very important because I feel like a lot of us in the global south, within the BRICS and outside of the BRICS, how do we ensure we're not working in silos? Because a lot of us already have mapped out stakeholders. How do we ensure going forward that a lot of us that are starting such councils can actually join something that is larger, that has been working on this for decades? So what is your strategy and advice for me so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel and we can kind of join the collaboration going forward?
Oh, easy questions. Please, who wants to start?
I can answer the question on data that was just asked. So we did, in India, we did a project over 2 years on AI in healthcare, and we looked at the data supply chain of the AI models that are currently being used in healthcare in India, which is primarily in radiology, in diagnostics, in some bits in kind of like detection, screening, and so on. And one of the things that we found, in fact, is what you're mentioning, that a lot of the times, because health data is so fragmented, it sits in hospitals, it sits in physical registers in public health institutions. Now, of course, in India, there is a Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission program, which is trying to digitize a lot of the data. But 50% of respondents, we did a survey with technologists, with doctors, with hospitals, said that actually they rely on global north data sets, which is often the open data sets like TensorFlow and images and so on. And what we also heard from doctors is, in fact, when they look at radiology images, there's a lot of work that goes in data annotation and labeling. And if it is also done incorrectly because of the data that you're training your models on, you can actually lead to consequences where there is incorrect detection of data. So one of the things, I think, specifically to your question on how do we strategize in global south, I think the issue is also that, especially with health data, it may not be even working if it is global south, because there are contextual specificities within different bodies and things like that. So I think, I don't know if it would work in the context of health, but I think one of the discussions we were having yesterday in digital public infrastructures, for example, like if we were to implement DPIs in Global South in different contexts, how can we reuse open interoperable protocols that are already existing instead of redeveloping them from scratch, such that those protocols are useful to then think about how can we use AI and DPI where they are relevant. And again, to go back to the point of like, do you start from the point of what is the problem we are trying to solve, as opposed to where can this AI system fit to the techno-solutionism point that was being raised. Yeah.
Bom, vamos lá.
Well, what INPD is doing with our ownership, the ownership of the data. Our ownership is a main focus. Here we are trying to have, we are focusing on this protection. So we are doing in a global manner our regulatory agency, and our regulatory agenda is trying to strengthen the rights of the ownership of the data. And assembling this agenda, the first agenda was only with the directory, the board council, because we didn't have enough time. We didn't have the CNPD, that National Council of Data Protection, that it's doing this part of having a consultative council of INPD, and this agenda, it's being done for this. And actions, when we see that personal data from our owners are being used in training the artificial intelligence, we are searching for informations. We already blocked some processes where they are using personal data, sensible personal data of kids and teenagers. We are using a base that was not appropriated for this, so we have a fast reaction to this. Data leakage, we are always monitoring. We have our communication channels. We have the auditing, we have the surveillance, and of course that when we are talking about supervision in this area, we have 6 servers. I cannot answer private requests. So usually we have goals where we are going to select the biggest damage, and with this we are able to use this assemble to focus on what is more important at the time. And we see the reality, and we see the importance of involving the population in a way that we have been working with the Minister of Education, is to tell that somehow since the first years of the infant, the child in school, is the risk that not he is going to be exposed, but it's going to expose the family itself in the social media. And earlier the kids are starting to use social media. Many times that the parents, to entertain the kids, they make the cell phone available, and we are having absurd challenges where the kid threw deodorant on the pillow and sniffed it and died. And we need to understand this important part of regulating those platforms, those teenage challenges that they are following, but we have to maintain the freedom of speech, the innovation, without blocking this freedom. But this risk, this self-risk, technically is how it's INPD is working. This prevention and reaction to the data leakage. So we have a team, and they are working with this. Every time that we have those we have damage to the the company or the organization needs to communicate ANPD. We have a small team, but we are working on top of this in a direct way. And many times when we have any crime, we send this to this proper organization or agency so they can follow its actions.
Sí, en realidad.
Actually, I understand. My answer was answered by Valdemar, but I wanted to talk about data protection because I understand that both should be treated as a prevention and exposed. A classic way that has to do with data protection in a preventive way is to act in what has to do with the theory and the practice of privacy. So we need to work since the beginning, from the beginning point of a case.
The same is true for security. Both elements needs to be seen preventively, and if this fails, the exposed topic is really important. I believe Camila wants to answer, and if there is a brief comment, we can wrap up later to go to the awards. I will answer our colleague in the back. So in general volumes, I cannot give you the volume of data, but the public numbers that we have are approximately 300,000 delivery professionals registered and 500,000 customers in our platform. The main data storage is AWS, and not only our company but other Brazilian companies are negotiating with AWS the adequacy to the Brazilian guidelines of international transparency. So it is a commitment for the other companies to negotiate with the larger companies the adequacy to the policies and the guidelines that we have in the LGPD in our regulation. And now, answering the cybersecurity question, how do we make sure these public policies are implemented in practice? With the experience of iFoods, not only working together with the cybersecurity teams and the technical teams, we have a dedicated team of privacy ops that is basically responsible for implementing these policies in practice, working together with the cybersecurity teams so the policies of access and data retention and data exclusion are efficient and executed in practice. So this is our overview. On a quick comment, the regulator now. Well, in terms of cybersecurity, ANPG is the only authority and agencies that when we investigate some data leakage, we go after the technical measures that the company and the body has adopted for the personal data protection. We see companies that has an absurd value and their heritage is our data. So they have the obligation that once they possess this data, they have to present to the ANPD all the technological tools that they used for this protection. If it is sensitive data or if they used encryption, and this is really important. And when we have a process of data leakage, we deal with that as well. I just forgot to mention that. And I believe Rodrigo has another comment. It's just a brief comment responding to the responsible of the controller's office of Recife. Going back to the culture, I think it is really important that we are in a discussion about the Global South, and the question is directed to that, and how do we make aware the vulnerable citizens on what they are entitled to. When I was coming, I was hearing the news, and I saw a data leakage of elderly population and the irregular use of the loans, and they experience that I have is that we will have a movement that the Consumer Defense Code had in the 90s, that the Data Protection Act can reach the citizens with the same level of importance. It's not only about discussing LGBT. Personal data matters, and the irregular sharing of data can bring serious consequences to their lives. And these vulnerable citizens, when we have a problem, we talk to a lawyer or we go to the Consumer Defense Codes. But the vulnerable citizen does not know that these institutions exist. And I just want to announce an initiative of the City of Rio that some weeks ago we started an operation with the Consumer Defense Codes that we named the Operations of Publicity. And based on the documents edited by the National Authority, we went to the drugstores with the Consumer Defense Codes to see how they are treating the personal data of the consumers. Where are the privacy notices? We are not applying fines, but we are just making them aware, these pharmacies and drugstores, that their data collection needs to have their consent. And the data sharing needs to be transparent and informed to the consumer and to the citizen, the data holder. And with that, in the civil society, we will be able to build a data protection culture, reaching the vulnerable citizen that does not know that they have these rights. Nico made a comment that in the city of Rio, we have the Municipal Council of Data Protection. It is an innovative measure. There is no municipal council that we know of. In municipal level, we have the National Council, but the objective of the council is to help the municipality to listen to the civil society about the data treatment. Out of the 22 board members, are only 2 are representatives of the administratives. We have board members here, Rodrigo and Erica, who are researchers, representative of the Bar Association, that are helping us. And this is really positive, because we can only build a data protection culture if we have our ears open to the request of civil society. And I am proud to have instituted this council and since 2023. Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. And I want to congratulate the work of our colleagues that are involved in this initiative, Walter, Erica, Rodrigo. And I want to end this great initial session from one side, highlighting that fortunately we have 2 or 3 days of work, of debates about these topics. We will start talking about this importance and this relevance, and maybe in 3 days we won't find all the solutions to the problems, but we are going to try to move forward in this exchange of solutions and problems. And I think that our work as researchers is to explore this subject critically, and as FGV, thanks to our sponsors and supporters, we have to stimulate research. We have an annual call, and this is the moment of the award for the best papers. We have Danilo Doneda Awards that is dedicated to the memory of Danilo Doneda, that without him this conference wouldn't exist. And it is our way to honor Danilo and also celebrating the success of the research made in Latin America, in the Global South. And I want to invite our friends Bianca Carmen, who is also a board member of CGI. She is representing CGI, one of our supporters, for this small ceremony of Danilo Doneda Awards. Thank you, Luca. First, I want to thank for the honor and responsibility to represent the CGI.br in this space of awards. The Internet Management Board in Brazil is multi-sectorial and bring strategic guidelines for the use and development of Internet in Brazil. I couldn't be happier to indicate the Danilo Doneda Awards in the institution of FGV, in which the Danilo's DNA was essential to structure the center of activities and the center of technology and society, and also the CGI. We had many different international articulations and political articulations, and I was lucky enough in the third work stream, besides working with Professor Danilo Doneda in Brasilia, when I was the head of research in the DT Privacy Lab in CGIS. So with Danilo Doneda and Laura Schertel. And I just want to bring the first point that Danilo represents these awards in a very special way. He developed his career not only academically with many different students and having mentored so many of us who are following his footsteps, that he started in the data protection and data privacy arena, but he was a strong political articulator for the existence of the general regulation of data protection in Brazil, and he participated in many of the essential debates related to the civil internet framework and being an important player in this scenario. And I have a strong admiration for Professor Danilo Doneda and the person, Danilo Doneda, that I had the privilege to call him my boss, my colleague, and in the end of his life, I could be lucky enough to call him my friend, as many of you had this privilege with Professor Danilo. Having said that, I'd like to pass the call for our awards and to say that these awards related to the papers is one other way to translate what Danilo Doneda represents not only to me but to many of us, is that since this is a multi-stakeholder conference, these awards also celebrate the importance of this articulation with many other sectors, especially from the academic sector. The celebration of the quality academic work and the relevant academic work, and that stands out in the national and international scenario. That's why I'm going to call the awardees, remembering that we will have one award, but also two honorable mentions related to the evaluation of the papers, considering that we had the participation in this committee Giancarlo Maldieri, Chiara Gallesi, Professor Nicolas Ingales, Guilherme Musselin, Guilherme Magalhães Martins, who was my professor in the university, and Professor Daniela Copete Graf. Now let's see the nominees. I can tell them, but I'm waiting for the slides here. So firstly, the winners are O'Hara Moreira, Pedro Saliba, and Rafael Zanata with the paper Corporate Chambers and Personal Data Treatments, Adequacy to the Principle of Purpose in Procurement Invoices by the Military Policies in Brazil. I call the guests to receive the honor, and I congratulate for the brilliant work in the data protection area. This was a surprise. She didn't know that she would win this award. And lastly, I'd like to invite, in case they are present here, our honorable mentions to Pedro Zucchetti Filho with the paper The Via Quatro in the Metropolitan Company of São Paulo, FRT Cases, Implications of Different FRT Tasks. And lastly, Daniela Juliano Silva, my colleague and professor of the university, data governance in the construction of smart cities in the experience of the municipality of Niterói in Rio de Janeiro. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here to receive this award, but I will be happy to take the award in her behalf. Thank you very much, everyone. An excellent conference. Thank you, Professor Luca, Professor Nicolo, and all the table. And let's continue our work. Thank you.